Hey, want to talk a bit about these allegations exposed by Panorama at Charing Cross Police Station in central London. Disgusting, absolutely disgusting is my reaction, but not totally surprising either, unfortunately. I'm going to read a bit of the report out. I'll put a link to the whole thing. It's quite lengthy, so I'm not going to read it out all in this video just for the sake of being somewhat condensed. But before I get into that, I want to talk a bit about some of the reactions I've seen. I mean, from comments. A lot of people are condemning it, calling it disgusting, and so on. What I would call normal reactions of decent people. But there are a troubling number of people who defend it. They either say the officers are absolutely right in what they're saying, or the classic line, it's just banter. Frankly, I hate that excuse. I think it could cover all sorts of ugliness. Um, the officers have been suspended. The officers involved have been suspended. I don't think that goes far enough because suspension is just temporary. It means they could go back on duty after a while. It's kind of a tap on the wrist. I don't think it goes far enough. I take the view that given the history of allegations against the Metropolitan Police, any officer exposed for these sort of attitudes is not fit to wear a uniform and they shouldn't be serving the public. I don't think they're going to change overnight. I don't think it's like, they'll be suspended for a while and they learn their lesson. Because what we've seen with the Wayne Couzens case and the David Carrick case is you had a culture there where these guys were operating for years. One turned out to be a prolific predator, the other murdered a young woman, which I'll address. It's towards the end of the report. That's the context to this. But the thing is, they weren't just rotten apples. They were working in an environment where others enabled it. There's no question about that. And the classic narrative is always, well, what about the good officers? What about all the good they do, all the brave acts and all of that? My response is, yeah, of course there's that. Of course you will get examples every day of police officers doing brave things and apprehending dangerous criminals. But quite frankly, the Metropolitan Police in particular, as the country's largest force, but police across the country have utterly, utterly, utterly damaged public trust in recent years. And if it's just this absolute failure to understand optics. What I mean by that is if it isn't wasting resources on following up on non-threatening social media posts, you know, sending uniformed officers to people's homes over social media feuds, which is many people do consider a serious threat to free speech. If it isn't that, then it's frankly racist, misogynist thugs who have no place wearing a uniform. It's kind of like two extremes. It's almost like extreme political correctness and extreme obnoxious attitudes. I mean, I do have some sympathy for genuinely decent officers who just want to serve the public and just want to be a credit to the uniform, and of course they exist. But they need to accept that this isn't a small thing. It's not just one or two officers. There is a culture here. They should accept that. You can't tell me this is just one or two individuals. Um, I think the obvious elephant in the room is the vetting process. How are these people let into the Met in the first place? Now, in some cases, they're long serving officers, so maybe the vetting when they got in wasn't as strict. But in my view, suspension isn't enough. There's another thing before I get into the report that people might say. They might say, oh, well, and if, and it's not very pleasant, but they were off duty, so they could say whatever they want. No, I disagree with that. I think because of the history of allegations against the Met, on or off duty, it doesn't matter, frankly, because this naive idea that they're going to suddenly change their attitudes when they've put a uniform on, they might be a bit more careful, they might be a bit more cautious. I don't think that someone who's coming out with blatantly racist attitudes and misogynistic attitudes should be anywhere near a police uniform. And the fact that they've been exposed off duty, some might even accuse the journalists of entrapment. No, I disagree. I think they've just exposed what they are. I've no sympathy for these officers at all. I would like to see them lose their livelihood. I think it's disgusting that they think that sort of attitude is okay. Particularly egregious is the one around the domestic violence victim. It's absolutely sickening, and that was not some sort of young wise guy. It was some like young officer trying to show off to his buddies. This was an experienced sergeant. That's the sort of attitude that comes out from an experienced sergeant. So, um, no, I really, really have a big problem with banter being used as an excuse in these things. We see it as well, when hazing, for example, is exposed in the armed forces. You'll get people say, oh, it's just banter. I actually am starting to hate that term banter because, like I say, it can be used for all manner of ugliness. Obviously, if you have a group of guys and they've had a few drinks, spirits are running high, yeah, they're going to be a bit more mellow, and that's fine. But and it's obviously not going to be the same as the working environment. I get that, but I think that if they're displaying these sort of attitudes, they clearly are not fit to serve the public. Why? Because what if you have a Muslim victim of crime, or an ethnic minority victim of crime, or a woman for that matter? How can any of those people trust the police when that is the attitude the police have towards them? So I'm going to read out a bit of the report, but I just don't think there's any excuse for this, and I don't. Suspension's better than nothing. It has to be said. In other parts of the world, nothing would happen. I mean, I remember the Kenyan police, which is notoriously corrupt. A few years back, there was reports of a young woman being raped, and the officers there, their attitude was to make the alleged rapist mow their lawn for a little bit, and their attitude was boys will be boys. That's the sort of thing that we see in other parts of the world. So this is certainly not unique to the Met by any means. Probably most police forces in the world have some sort of corruption, but just because it could be worse elsewhere doesn't mean that it's okay. Um, anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to read this out. Okay, Unmasked, secret BBC filming exposes hidden culture, misogyny and racism inside the Met Police. I won't read out the whole thing, like I say, I'll read out the first few paragraphs. This piece is by Adrian Polglas and Joseph Lee. Serving Metropolitan Police officers called for immigrants to be shot, revelled in the use of force, and were dismissive of rape claims and footage captured by a Panorama undercover reporter. The evidence of misogyny and racism challenges the Met's promise to have tackled what are called toxic behaviours after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer. Panorama's secret filming shows officers making sexualised comments to colleagues and sharing racist views about immigrants and Muslims. This evidence reveals that far from being driven out of the Met, racist and misogynistic attitudes have been driven underground. Someone new joins, boom, mask on, you've got to figure them out, one officer said. In other words, it continues, they're just being more careful. After the BBC sent a detailed list of allegations to the Met, it suspended 8 officers and 1 staff member and took 2 more officers off frontline duties. Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley said the behaviour outlined by Panorama was disgraceful, totally unacceptable and contrary to the values and standards of the force. Among the officers filmed by our undercover reporter were Sergeant Joe McIlvinney, an officer with nearly 20 years service in the Met, who was dismissive about a pregnant woman's allegations of rape and domestic violence after a colleague raised concerns about the decision to release the accused man on bail. He replied, that's what she says. Now, I'm just going to follow up a little bit on that one, because some people might say, okay, well, he's just doubtful. That isn't necessarily in itself, sack-worthy. The problem is he's just being very flippant about it. And this was a woman who was pregnant and was stamped on physically, and a female colleague in the room is clearly uncomfortable about his dismissive attitude to it. Now, yes, sometimes false allegations are made, but that sort of dismissiveness is just fairly unprofessional. The report goes into further details here, so this is just outlining some of the claims. PC Martin Borg, who enthusiastically described how he saw another officer, Sergeant Steve stump on a suspect's leg. PC Borg laughed when he described how he had offered to make a statement saying the suspect had tried to kick the sergeant first. It was unclear from CCTV footage if the claim was true. Well, that just suggests corruption, like they're going to frame someone to justify their own abuse. PC Phil Nielsen, who told a reporter in the pub that a detainee who had overstayed his visa should have a bullet through his head, and once at shag rape women you do the cock and let them bleed out. It's pretty ironic he's playing moral high ground with, he says those who rape women, when they are themselves joking about rape. This is the sort of mindset in the Met. So, they should start with themselves. I mean, would he have had that attitude to Wayne Couzens or David Carrick? So it's just double standards. We're wearing a uniform so we could be obnoxious. And again, people will say, "Oh, that's entrapment," or "He was off duty." I don't accept that. To hell with him. To hell with him. He's not fit to wear a uniform. There was, as part of the interview, actually, just read a little bit more here. BBC Panorama's undercover reporter Rory Gibb spent 7 months up to January this year as a designated detention officer in the custody suite of Charing Cross Police Station in central London. It is a civilian role which involves working closely with sergeants and constables, but not taking part in arrests. Charing Cross is one of the Met's 22 custody suites where people are held after arrest and before they are charged or released. It is often a volatile environment where officers deal with violent people and vulnerable individuals, including young people and those with mental health issues. It's worth bearing in mind in the last few decades, dozens of people have died in police custody and not a single officer has done jail time for that. That's not to say in every case that's, been abuse, but it's worth pointing out. The station has been the focus of an investigation by the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, into bullying and discrimination nearly 4 years ago. It found that some officers had discussed hitting their girlfriends, shared offensive and discriminatory comments, and joked about rape in private group chats. Whistleblowers told Panorama that officers with racist and misogynistic attitudes still worked at the station, despite the Met's promise to root out rogue officers and cultural failings. So what the hell is Sir Mark Rowley doing? He can condemn this all he wants, but unless these people are fired, and he might say operationally that's not his decision. He's the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. I think he could do more than he's doing, other than just expressing outrage. I don't think suspension goes far enough. I think they need to purge these rotten apples, really. They shouldn't be getting, they are not fit to serve the public. They're just not. Just go read a bit more. Well, actually, that gets into the individual cases. This is, some people might be tempted to dismiss those things, but this goes further into it, and I do suggest you read the whole report. I mean, it really is disgusting stuff. As for the Muslims hate us, that might well be true. We do have an Islamist problem in this country, but it's not the job of police officers to decide which members of the public they like and dislike. It's their job to apprehend criminals. So, for example, if you have a Muslim victim of a hate crime, let's say, they are physically attacked for being a Muslim, or a Muslim woman has her hijab ripped off, will these officers show sympathy to them? Will they treat them as a victim of crime? That's why it matters. That's just an example. Women, how can women trust the Metropolitan Police after this? And people will say, there's 35,000 officers in the Met. You can't say they're all the same. Well, I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there's clearly a culture that is enabling this. Clearly the good officers are not doing enough. Now, I give credit to the whistleblowers, but there are too many police officers who have a knee-jerk attitude of defence, like sort of downplaying it or pretending it doesn't happen. It does. It clearly does. And there's times that there are situations taken out of context. I would cite the example of the career criminal who was shot by the police, and it became a whole big thing with the Met, and the firearms officers were taken off duty and people were condemning that. Well, it did turn out actually that he'd driven a vehicle at the police. So there are times when there may be contextual situations that people do need to think a little bit more about and not rush to judgment. But to me, these officers' words speak for themselves. I don't think there's any taken out of context. How can it be taken out of context when their guard is down? And people might say it's unfair to film them in that situation. It's entrapment, but it's a way of exposing them. I've no sympathy for them. I don't care if it's entrapment. It's exposing their genuine views. Put it this way, Panorama reached out to the individual officers to see if they defend themselves. That would have been their opportunity to defend themselves. Why haven't they? Why haven't they? Maybe they're under orders not to. I don't know. But to me, if they think that they're innocent, they'd be shouting at the top of their lungs, no, this isn't me, it was taken out of context. So why aren't they doing that? Maybe it's because they know that they're rotten apples and that they've been exposed. Like I say, this goes into the individual cases. It's really disgusting stuff, to be honest. I'll just round it up with the last few paragraphs. Panorama also wrote to the individual officers identified in this article they have not responded. After Sarah Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by a serving police officer in 2021, a review of the Met by Baroness Louise Casey concluded it was institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynistic. Sir Mark Rowley accepted the review's recommendations, but at the time did not accept that the problems were institutional. Now, that's 4 years ago. They clearly haven't done enough. It's went underground, the officers have been suspended, but they should not be even serving. That's the point. In 2022, the forces put into special measures by the Police Inspectorate, a form of enhanced scrutiny which ended in January this year. At the time, Sir Mark said the force was making massive progress. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, who also reviewed Panorama's footage, said he was struck how high standards, values and discipline didn't seem to be present or being inculcated by the people who were in authority, referring to the sergeants. That's the point. The sergeant, as the more senior officer there, should have been really having some control in the situation instead of enabling it. He said the behaviour of these officers undermined policing by consent and made the job harder in the long run. The former Chief Constable, Miss Fish, said, this is the Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire Police, I've seen enough to say there is a highly toxic culture there of hypersexualised male behaviour, misogyny, racism and gratuitous unlawful violence. She said the Met leadership never grasped the significance, the scale and impact of this culture. It's always been a rotten apple, not a rotten barrel, she said. But they just haven't done enough about this. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I just don't think that suspension is enough. If Sir Mark Rowley is serious about this, he will be doing everything in his power to purge out the rotten apples. No second chances, no tap on the wrist and you're taken off duty for a few weeks. These people shouldn't be getting paid by the public. Remember, they're public servants, they shouldn't be paid. They should not be allowed to wear a uniform, because how can a woman who's been a victim of domestic violence have any faith that the police will take her seriously? How could a woman who's been raped have any faith that the police will take her seriously? Now, of course, this doesn't mean going to the other extreme and coercing confessions, because we've also seen in other forces innocent men, falsely accused of crimes and then spending years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. But, all in all, I'm getting tired of the police making excuses. They always say, oh, the public doesn't see the good that we do, or it's taken out of context, or, we're in an impossible position. No, it's not impossible to be a professional officer. It's not impossible to know that it's not okay to joke about rape when you're a serving police officer. And yes, of course, there will be good things that are done, and actually the report does mention that. It does mention that Rory Gibb does mention that he saw professionalism at the station as well, and people treated in a courteous way. But let's look at it this way: 35,000 police officers. Now let's say it's only 1 in 10 are bad. They're misogynistic, they're racist, and all the rest of it. That would still be 3,500 officers. Let's play the devil's advocate and say it's even less than that. Let's say it's 1 in 100. Then it's only 350. The point is, one is one too many, because that's an abuse of power. And this is the sort of attitude that Wayne Couzens had when he said that he was a police officer, so he literally told his victim he could get away with it. That's what these people, that's how they're empowered. So my message to good officers is, if you want to regain public trust, start being honest about this. Stop getting defensive and saying, oh, it's not all of us. Be honest about the problem. Because right now the police are doing themselves no favours, between cracking down on free speech to coming out with disgusting attitudes. It's just the public have absolutely no faith anymore. And yes, forces do vary, Where I live, Northumbria Police, I don't think it's the worst. We haven't had the sort of scandals that some other forces have yet. Yet. That doesn't mean we're totally immune from it. Now, all my life I've broadly, respected the police, but I hate abuse of power. I hate it. Because with criminals, they are hurting the public and sometimes they get away with it. And we could talk about soft sentencing and that angers people, but at least there's a chance that the criminals will be arrested and held to account. Corrupt officers, they're suspended. And if it wasn't for Panorama, this wouldn't even be known. But to all those people who defend them and say it's just banter, shame on you, because you're also enabling this culture. I don't care that they're off duty, because I just don't think they're going to change their attitude when they're on duty, or they might be a bit more careful about it. But off duty or not, if they have those attitudes, they shouldn't be allowed to serve in a police force that's representing one of the most diverse cities in the world. How can they serve the public when they're bigoted towards half the public? How can they? It's ridiculous. Imagine, for those who say it's banter, they almost anger me as much as the corrupt police themselves. Imagine if your daughter or your sister was a victim of domestic violence and you overheard officers, or you heard about officers joking about it. There's stuff in that report I don't even want to say because it's so disgusting and gratuitous. I feel unclean repeating it, quite frankly. So I'll let you, check it out yourself, this footage. But few things. Huge credit to Rory Gibb. This is the power of investigative journalism. He is a credit to his profession, unlike those so-called police officers. So, props to Rory Gibb. He's what a good journalist should be. And secondly, let's see if Nigel Farage and his party condemns this. Let's see if they condemn it, because that to me will be telling. Will they condemn it? Will they be silent? Or will they try and make excuses? Will Farage and his party claim it's banter? Let's see. Because frankly, I wouldn't put it past Reform to try and diminish this. And it just shows they're not fit to govern this country. Let's see.